Hi everyone, my name is Macie Monahan and I am a wildlife biologist with ACE here at Bryce Canyon National Park, and today I'm going to be talking about Utah prairie dogs in the park and how we hope to deal with some Utah prairie dog fatalities and road-related mortalities here with wildlife underpasses. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about Bryce Canyon. So Bryce Canyon was declared a national monument in 1923 and then declared a national park in 1928. We, as a park, are part of the Paunsaugunt Recovery Unit for Utah prairie dogs, and the park is most famous for its largest accumulation of hoodoos, most famous one being Thor's Hammer, but I'd like to have honorable mention for our Utah prairie dog looking hoodoo here. We border Dixie National Forest, Grand Staircase National Monument, and private land, including the town of Tropic. The park supports about 2.5 million visitors a year who mainly come to hike the main amphitheater and experience Bryce's scenic beauty and wildlife. But with these 2.5 million visitors, they spend most of their time here. So here, the Utah prairie dogs are amongst the most visited and developed area of the park. We have 5 active Utah prairie dog colonies, which makes managing the colonies and visitors very unique here. We have a great deal of management responsibilities and issues, including people parking off roadways and entering meadows where prairie dogs are present. So the Utah prairie dog is a keystone species, meaning that their livelihood supports other species in the park. Burrowing and foraging aerates the soil, they maintain grassland habitats, and provide habitat for other wildlife, all while supporting food sources for raptors and carnivore species in the park. Unlike other prairie dog species, the Utah prairie dog is endemic to southwest Utah with 3 recovery units, including the West Desert, the Paunsaugunt Plateau, and the Awapa Plateau near Loa. Pre-1920s, there was a population size of 100,000 Utah prairie dogs in the United States. By 1960s, their range and numbers reduced tremendously due to poisoning and other control methods, diseases like the sylvatic plague, drought, and human-related habitat alterations resulting from cultivation and grazing practices. By 1972, there was an estimation of 3,000 Utah prairie dogs in 37 colonies in the United States, and it appeared that Utah prairie dogs would be extinct by 2000. Utah prairie dog was then listed as an endangered species in 1973 under the Endangered Species Act, and they were then reintroduced into Bryce Canyon in 1974, and efforts continued until 1987. Numbers increased during the 1980s, and they were then classified as threatened in 1984. Bryce Canyon is currently the only park unit to have Utah prairie dogs, and they are active in the park from mid-February to November with 5 active colonies. On this graph here, you can see our spring count data dating back to the 70s, where Utah prairie dogs were reintroduced into the park. And this past year, our spring count data was 91. You can also see, on average, the past 5 years has been steadily declining due to a collapse in our East Creek Meadow colony from the sylvatic plague. But in 2022, we saw an increase in numbers there with most of our colonies. And from our spring count data, we also estimated about 655 prairie dogs inhabit the park, and that's based on calculations and an equation that we can put our spring count data into to estimate prairie dogs that are below ground and juveniles that should emerge in the spring. Like I stated earlier, amongst the most developed area of the park are 5 active Utah prairie dog colonies. With that, we see a lot of roadkill from prairie dogs crossing the roadways to forage and disperse in the area. And the park has been collecting specifically Utah prairie dog roadkill data and mapping their locations and the sex, the age, class, and other some identifying factors since 2018. mitigation efforts to slow drivers down and hopefully mitigate prairie dogs from being hit includes lowering speed limits, wildlife crossing signage, stop signs, and speed bumps. They've shown to be slightly effective, but roadkill is still common to this day. Since 2018, on average, we see about 27 prairie dogs hit per year. So that is quite a significant amount compared to about 91 prairie dogs that we counted in our spring count data last spring. So now on to wildlife underpasses. This past year, a project for wildlife underpasses was proposed, so it's still in the very early planning stages. We are gathering information from stakeholders and partner agencies and also looking into funding options. During peak visitation and visitation months in this project area specifically, the park sees about 80,000 vehicles on the roadway each month. We also see a lot of visitors walk on narrow road shoulders that will hang out, post up with cameras, and sit on road shoulder barriers to view the prairie dogs, which is causing some safety concerns for vehicles and visitors alike in the area. The need for safer wildlife viewing in the area is very important. We have some pullouts, but those get overcrowded pretty quickly. The park proposed this wildlife underpass to target Utah prairie dogs in the area where we see the most mortalities and visitation, which is highlighted on this map here. This project includes raising roadways, adding sidewalks for visitor use, installing potentially mock burrows, installing a new culvert, or using cement underpasses that go under the highway. You can see some of our ideas here on the left for the underpasses that we will potentially use. But the park would also post-project utilize an effectiveness monitoring program, which would include installing cameras at the end of each underpass. We would also consider collaring Utah prairie dogs from the colonies adjacent to the roadway to track their behavior and use as well. But I can also talk more on this topic later for people who are interested. Feel free to reach out. I have my information on the next slide. So overall, I talked about Bryce Canyon, the status of Utah prairie dogs, their dealings with road-related and vehicle-related mortalities, and a potential future project for how we hope to mitigate some of those issues. Like I said, feel free to reach out. My email is listed here. If you have any comments or questions about this project. This year is the park's centennial year. We are hosting a Utah Prairie Dog Day on May 11th with booths, some viewing stations, a calling contest, and an art contest for local communities. We hope to see you all there, and thank you.